Okay, hear me out. Why have one job when you can have 6 or 7? What would be the problem with that, right? Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and most importantly, welcome back to the deep dive series. On my channel, I do these series where I explore cultural phenomena through the lens of social and digital media. And my name is Alex. I am a chronically online person, and I will be your tour guide through all of this. These are just topics that I'm interested in. If you have any topics that you're interested in listening to me yap about, let me know in the comments. So in today's video, we're examining a phenomenon known as side hustles. You've probably heard about it. It's something that I've been interested in the past year or so. So my own selfish interest in side hustles has just been for a year now, but it's been a brewing conversation in the media and I think in the cultural setting, the landscape for over a few years now. I think ever since the pandemic, this conversation has shifted in the workplace to talking about side jobs, side gigs, people starting their own businesses, and side hustles is, a topic of conversation. Hi guys, Editing Alex here. I wanted to pop in because I'm editing the video right now and I feel like I didn't do a good enough job prefacing the difference of side hustles versus having traditional second jobs or having multiple jobs. And I am mainly in this video referring to side hustles in the context of the gig economy. I know side hustles, for me at least, is a pretty relatively new term. I think in general, it's on the rise, but I know that it's not new at all. But I know that the concept also of people having multiple jobs to make ends meet is not a new concept at all. So I don't want it to come off like I was in this video talking to you about having multiple jobs is a new thing. It is not at all, but I am specifically talking about the rise of side hustles within the gig economy. So hope that clears things up. And even though the conversation has been around side hustles, today we are going to be investigating, putting our little thinking caps on, and investigating specifically how social media and digital media has played a role in creating this narrative for side hustles, because I have a really interesting take. I don't think it's a hot take. I think this is something that people are talking about, but it's a very one-sided conversation when we talk about side hustles most of the time. And so if you're new here and you are, excited to listen to this, make sure to watch my other deep dive videos and hit the subscribe button if you're interested in hearing more. Okay, and so first, what is a side hustle, right? If you've heard of side hustles before, you've probably heard it before in maybe a positive connotation, maybe in a negative connotation. I pulled up a little Merriam-Webster dictionary definition for us today, but a side hustle is defined as any work performed for income supplementary to one's job. So this is just really a broad definition, as, side hustles can encompass anything from dog sitting to literally creating an entire side business and freelancing. It can literally encompass anything. So I don't think there's a hard and fast definition for it. It's just supposed to kind of be any side income or any side gig you have supplementary to your primary income. And so next, we're going to jump into the rise of side hustles. Why are we seeing it become more prevalent? Or if you're not seeing it become more prevalent, I'm going to tell you that it has become more prevalent in the last few years. And so while you've been seeing it on your social media feeds of people sharing their, side hustles, the famous my 5 to 9 after my 9 to 5, those types of videos, which I am guilty of making myself. And you've probably seen it on mainstream media, in your favorite TV show or, in the books that you read. But actually, besides just media, side hustles have become a financial norm for many Americans today. So in a recent study from MarketWatch about side hustles that surveyed over 2,000 Americans, they found that more than half, 54% of Americans, say they've adopted a side hustle to supplement their primary source of income in the last 12 months. And that study also found that for many people, a side hustle felt like a necessity rather than a choice. And so I don't mean to, bombard you with so many statistics so early on in the video, but I just thought this study, you should definitely check it out. I will link it in the description box, was so pertinent. I mean, it's also a recent study. It was a 2024 study. So I think it's the most recent data we have on, side hustles that I found. But according to the study as well, 44% of Americans who said they've taken on the opportunity for extra income said they still feel financially insecure. And people with a side hustle were also more likely to report that they they were living paycheck to paycheck compared to those living without a side hustle. And when asked about the biggest obstacle to achieving their financial goals, the most common response among side hustlers was the cost of living, which is no surprise, but I just thought it was interesting to put kind of here, comparing actually like the financial circumstances of people with side hustles to people without. So in the past, while side hustles may have been a thing of, exploring your passions and exploring new careers through these like side gigs, it has now been a conversation about, necessity. And it has been more about, necessity and, living, paying your bills and putting food on the table than it is more about those other things. Because the reality is the cost of living is going up, but wages aren't necessarily like trying to compete with the high cost of living. And that's not even to mention all of the other financial burdens that people have that kind of stacks up on top of just the high cost of living, which includes debt and inflation and all that stuff. And so it's really complicated. And I think the conversation of side hustles has shifted from like what once was, people like exploring their side passions and doing things that they're passionate about outside of work, and it has now become more of a necessity. But interestingly enough, the side hustle boom is happening across, all generations. I think that was really interesting for me to read because I thought it was sort of a thing that was, resonant among younger people, since I feel like younger people have a lot of time on their hands. We're not really settling down, having families yet. And so we have a lot of that time, and that plays a role and factor into it. But I think it's interesting to see how, older generations are taking advantage of the side hustle boom and, finding ways to make extra income, to make ends meet. Like it's a necessity. But it is to be noted that younger people are the majority of the people, engaging in side hustles because of that factor, that they are in a different stage of life, but also because of this incredibly shit job market. Like, these days you have to find like side hustles and side gigs because most people can't even find jobs, and then other people are settling for less because they, can't get those really high competing jobs. And so they have to make, extra income in some way. And so I'm going to briefly touch on these because I can't talk about side hustles without talking about the benefit of them, even though that's not really the point of this video. This video is not to convince you to like go off and find a side hustle, but just in case you were wondering, side hustles have a lot of benefits. I feel like I am particularly a person who has, benefited more than was negatively affected by side hustles. I have a few side hustles now, and I used to have a lot more as a college student. But I think the obvious one is the extra income. I think it is especially useful for people who are either paying off large debts and, they can't do that and, live their daily lives on their, full-time salary or income. And so they have side income to pay for those debts. But it's especially useful too if you're like saving on a big purchase. I know, especially with like home payments, cars, and all of that, it is especially useful because, again, an extra $250 in your pocket could go a long way, saving month to month. And then another benefit of a side hustle is that you get to explore your passions. I mean, most people start side hustles in something that they are really interested in, but they don't know if it'll be profitable yet. And so they're not ready to take that risk to jump into it full time. And so they'll start a side hustle or side gig, and they will explore their passions through that before it becomes profitable, before it takes off. And so that's also another benefit of having a side hustle. There are so many more, but again, that's not the point of this video. There are negative side effects of having a side hustles. Again, side hustles are done outside of your primary income. So whatever those hours are, you are working on top of that. And for many people, that can mean working, full time throughout the week and then working extra hours on top of that. And that could lead to a lot of burnout. A lot of people lose sleep because of side hustles. There's only so many hours in the day to do things. And many people find that it is a worthy sacrifice to sacrifice their sleep and, things throughout their day that can help with mental well-being to work and make extra money. And this could lead to a host of other things like mental health issues, like anxiety and depression. There's a lot of things associated with side hustles behind the scenes that people don't see, and people sort of take it these days as, or at least that is the kind of rhetoric that I feel among the younger generation, is like, if you have a side hustle or if you're like working, freelance or whatever, you're seen as like, oh wow, you know how to manage your time. Like, you've got your life together. When really, I think there is a lot more nuance beneath the surface. Okay, so now we're getting into the meat of it. This is the impact of social and digital media on side hustles. So these days, you can't go anywhere anymore, at least anywhere digitally and online, without someone trying to sell you something, whether it's a paid ad or it's an organic social media post or it's someone just trying to sell you on a lifestyle. No matter what, everything is positioned in a way to sell you something. And so I think the biggest role that social and digital media play in side hustles is romanticizing this guilt-free, easy, quick way of making money that is really targeting vulnerable people who are looking for sort of an easy way because they're strapped for cash, they're paying off insane debts. And so I think that's the main issue that we're like talking about. And it's not to refute that side hustles can't be lucrative. I don't think that has what anyone has been saying at all. I think they're just saying that the conversation is a lot murkier and it's a lot more nuanced that people aren't talking about. They're sort of positioning it in this way where it's quick and easy, and they're taking advantage of a lot of vulnerable people. And in the more literal sense, there are literally people who have side hustles selling side hustles to other people. Like, that's their side hustle. I like this quote from an article from Money Digest that describes it as, however, the promise of even greater income opportunities that pummels online viewers across platforms is an undeniable siren call. Unfortunately, creating these kinds of help or coaching programs is actually just another side hustle for the people behind them. These programs may or may not actually provide much assistance to hopeful workers hoping to make it big. Indeed, hope is the key concept in that struggling individuals looking for a breakthrough opportunity are often willing to pay for guidance and inspiration. So this type of content and the normalization of side hustles contributes to this get-rich-quick idea. And you've probably heard of get-rich-quick schemes, but it's sadly not the reality for a lot of people. And in fact, this type of content can feel predatory, targeted at people who are most vulnerable, who, again, are looking for ways to pay off debts. And it always comes with a sense of urgency. They speak with a sense of urgency, so they influence people to act most of the time when they're in a really bad financial state already and they can't afford to, embark on these get-rich-quick schemes that, again, don't have a huge success rate. In fact, some side hustles can actually lead to more harm than good. And some, are just a scam. Like, a lot of them are just scams. And again, it's really hard to sift through which ones are scams. And people, I think every day, like normal people without a good financial literacy, without a good financial background, which most Americans are not literate financially, can, feel preyed upon from these like ads or from people selling the side hustles and the ease of side hustles. Because again, it's more nuanced, but like no one is willing to have that conversation when they're trying to push this side hustle on other people and, teaching or selling a course about ways to do this side hustle and do it successfully. A popular hot topic that most people refer to when they're often referring to the dark side of side hustles is the e-commerce business, having an e-commerce side hustle, whether that's like selling digital products or like anything online. Like, there's a ton of examples and I'll like leave them popped up on the screen. And they can be lucrative in theory, but I think there's a lot more behind the scenes that goes on. It's a very difficult world to like get into, especially if you're someone who's never done e-commerce before and then all of a sudden you want to get into an e-commerce side hustle because you think it's quick and easy. Like, it's just very misleading. And I think in recent years, especially when we're seeing the rise in side hustles, we're also seeing the rise in e-commerce businesses because of, how many services are remote now. I feel like everything is like transactional almost, and you don't need to have in-person relationships with people anymore. Everything can just be done online, and especially with the advent of AI, which has been used in e-commerce businesses. Take something like dropshipping, for example. Dropshipping is such a popular thing that people turn to, I think, when it comes to side hustles. And I actually was referring specifically to this example of a clip that I heard in a financial audit. If you guys know Caleb Hammer's financial audit, where he's a YouTuber who interviews people who are most of the times in, troubling financial situations, and they're trying to get out of a lot of debt. And he was interviewing this person who was in a bad financial situation with a lot of debt. And the guy was just like, oh, I'm doing drop shipping now. And he sort of said it as a way of like, it's going to solve all of my issues. And Caleb was like, you do know that like, it's not a quick and easy fix, right? And that got me thinking a lot. And I feel like that inspired a little bit of this video. I've always been thinking about side hustles, but when I heard that, I was just like, oh man, it is true what they say about like people just, getting on this get rich quick scheme. And so if you don't know what dropshipping refers to a fulfillment method that allows people to outsource handling and shipping products to a third party. So essentially, you don't have to deal with the actual physical inventory or perform any shipping and handling. And there are most of the times no upfront inventory costs, or at least like that's how they promote it to you, because all of the products are purchased on demand. So it's sort of like you're like the middleman. And actually, what do you think the success rate for dropshipping is? Because when I first heard of it, or the way that it was like pitched to me in like those start dropshipping videos, I thought it was like so much higher than it actually is. But the actual success rate for dropshipping ranges anywhere from between 10 to 20%. Right? Like that's not what you'd expect, but because of how much is promoted and shared as a get rich quick scheme, it seems like a lot more people would be successful at it. You would think at the very least. And you would think with how easy people are promoting it as, you would think that it's, again, why is it so low? I really like this article from Wired that explores the dark side of dropshipping. I'm going to be referencing from this article a lot because it talks about people with real experiences dropshipping, i.e. not me. So someone that actually makes a decent profit from dropshipping said this about it. When you do dropshipping and Facebook ads, it's like going to the casino and pressing the slot machine. And based off of what happens, that's how your emotions are going to be. So I think what's especially enticing about these e-commerce side businesses and dropshipping in particular is that they are marketed as free and quick. And that seems to be, for the most part, misleading. In the research that I did, it is entirely possible to start a dropshipping business with as little as like $100 or, even free. There are like a ton of YouTube videos and a ton of, post on the media about like starting a dropshipping business for free and kind of promoting again this like get rich quick scheme to you. And yes, it's possible, but I think the general consensus is the possibility of you actually being successful and making a lot of that return and like having it be a long sustaining business is not very high. The chances of you doing that with like not putting money down and only putting less than 100 into the business is not a lot. And so it's entirely misleading when people are like, yeah, a dropshipping business is so cheap, so easy, and it's so quick. And the reality is that as dropshipping and e-commerce businesses become more popular and more normalized in like the culture and like of America and like people starting to get on it, the market becomes highly competitive. And so if you really want to stand out, you definitely have to put some investment down, because how are you going to compete with all of these other, people who are trying to do the same thing and get rich from dropshipping? And so if you really want to make like money in the e-commerce world, you have to be ready to put down some type of investment, whether that's spending money, on a good landing page, setting up the e-commerce store, or spending money on marketing. And even if you're not spending a lot of money, you're spending a lot of time to do that. And these days, time is money. I don't care how you spin it, time is valuable and it is worth as much as money. And so people who end up getting into these businesses with the idea that it's a get rich quick kind of scheme end up realizing that it is quite a hefty investment, and sometimes they end up being put in situations where they are forced to, be in a bad financial state and cause even more harm to their financial well-being than if they weren't to start the business in the first place. So that's something that I've seen, and that's a cycle I feel like that is repeated and again is seen in these people. And yeah, I feel like a big argument and a thing that a lot of people say is like, well, why don't these people know better? Well, why don't these people just read the fine print, or they like, read articles from different things. But it's an entirely different thing to have that and then also have the norm be that this is like a get rich quick thing. Like, it's really hard, especially as many Americans, again, are financially illiterate, and I think in general don't have the time because they're already dealing with debt and, bills and everything. And so they don't have the time to do research. And so these predatory schemes of, people trying to sell this idea of, getting rich quick are targeted at these people. And so I don't necessarily think we can put the blame on regular people for not reading the fine print. And so the same Wired article interviewed someone who, talked about the dark side of dropshipping. And it was actually from a business that, made a really decent profit and actually, had a good successful dropshipping business. And so this one woman describes how, she has a very successful dropshipping business, but she described how one day her Chinese supplier couldn't cope with the demand. And so they just stopped shipping their orders. And so in return, this woman's inboxes were filled with furious customers and people calling them and telling them that they were a scam. But in order to accommodate, the woman ended up actually issuing refunds. But because they had already spent all of the money on Facebook ads and, getting the e-commerce store set up, they started taking out loans to issue the refunds. Like, isn't that insane? Like, you start this business in hopes of making a lot of money. And for her, that was the case. In the beginning, she had a lot of orders. She had a successful product that she was selling through drop shipping, and she got the orders. But then because the supplier couldn't accommodate for it, there ended up being, this issue where she had to issue refunds. And so I think dropshipping, there's a whole rabbit hole you could go down. This is not the video for that. There are a lot of issues with it, I think, when it comes to suppliers and making sure that the supplier isn't a scam, making sure you have everything kind of streamlined, and there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And that, for many people, is a risk that they just can't take, but they don't know that. And so whether or not these get-rich-quick schemes actually work or not is not for me to say because, again, I have never tried it, and I am just kind of, looking most likely at the sort of predatory and toxic behavior that these sort of schemes kind of play into and that are entirely targeted at a very vulnerable population. But in general, if anything, if you get anything from this video, I just think that side hustles are a distraction to the larger problem of Americans not making enough money to pay their bills. And the reason why romanticizing side hustles and encouraging people to, find side gigs and other jobs on top of the one they have already is harmful. Because as this article primarily states, like the tiny house craze, the romanticization of the side hustle is a way of normalizing wage stagnation. So we are spending so much time telling people what other side gigs they should do and, all of these extra things they need to do on top of the things that they're already doing, when we should direct our energy at these companies and the larger system as a whole to pay livable wages. So I think the conversation has shifted so much into individualism and like blaming other people for not making enough money or to do this, when I think the conversation is so much larger and we sort of ignore that and we're like, that's exactly what they want us to do. They want us to like get into this little circle where we're like working and sort of like honestly killing ourselves to like work and just put food on the table, when I think it's just a distraction for the larger issue. And so again, I don't think side hustles are inherently good or bad. I just think that we are not showing two sides of the conversation, which is generally what happens on social media and on media itself, is that a lot of things are glorified, a lot of things are romanticized. And I think this definitely was increased after the pandemic because, with a lot of people working remote, we had more time for side hustles, right? Or like people wanted to explore passions. And I can see how it started that way, where people were deciding to take on side hustles to explore other passions and to like kind of like explore new careers. But I think it quickly turned into something where people started taking advantage of, again, vulnerable people. But yeah, I feel like that is, my deep dive into side hustles. As someone with a few side hustles. I think I'll like mention this a little bit. I do have a few side hustles, but I am very fortunate and privileged enough where I have a pretty low cost of living compared to most people. And so my side hustles are for the exploring your passion sort of side. Making an extra income is great for, savings or potentially for something else in the future to pay off debts. But I think for me, I'm fortunate and very privileged to have it sort of be exploring your passion. And that's why I have kind of gone down this rabbit hole, because I didn't know that side hustles were positioned in a way where they are like toxic and predatory. And I myself am guilty of glorifying side hustles, because I always thought that like if you had a side hustle, you were cool because you were able to kind of have that time and you were able to manage your time correctly. But again, it's a lot of it's a complicated and nuanced topic, and I was very excited to do the research for myself and kind of like dig into it a little bit more. So I hope you enjoyed it as well. But as always with these videos, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think side hustles are good or bad? Do you think they're here to stay, or it's just a quick sort of thing that people are cashing in on and it's probably something that's going to like die culturally in the next few years? Let me know. And if you have any suggestions for other deep dives, let me know in the comments as well. I have a few videos coming up for that. But thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next one.